John collapses during peace protest. What supporters did next was incredible. December 10th, 1971. New York City. Washington Square Park. The air was freezing. 20,000 people stood in the cold, all of them waiting for one man, John Lennon. He was supposed to speak at 2 p.m., a protest against the war, against the violence, against everything that was tearing America apart. But what happened that afternoon would change everything. Not just for John, but for every single person who stood in that park. John had been working non-stop for months, recording, protesting, fighting deportation. The U.S. government wanted him gone. They said he was dangerous, a threat to national security, all because he believed in peace. Yoko was worried. She'd been telling him to rest, to slow down. But John couldn't stop, not when so many people were counting on him. They need to hear the truth, he'd told her that morning. They need to know someone's fighting for them. By the time John arrived at Washington Square Park, he looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes. His face pale, but his spirit was still burning. He stepped up to the microphone. 20,000 voices erupted, cheering, chanting, "Give peace a chance! Give peace a chance!" John raised his hand. The crowd went silent. "We're here today," he began, his voice cutting through the winter air. "Because we refuse to be silent anymore." The crowd roared their approval. "They want us to sit down and shut up. They want us to accept war as normal. They want us to forget that every soldier who dies, every child who loses a father, every mother who gets a telegram, is a failure of humanity." His voice was getting stronger, more passionate, more raw. "But we won't be silent. We won't accept it. We won't." And then it happened. John stopped mid-sentence. His hand went to his chest. His eyes widened, and before anyone could react, he collapsed, right there on stage, in front of 20,000 people. The microphone hit the ground with a deafening crash. For one horrible second, everything froze. Then someone screamed, and chaos erupted. Yoko was the first to reach him. She'd been standing just off stage, watching. Now she was on her knees beside him, screaming his name. "John! John, can you hear me?" His eyes were closed, his body limp. People were rushing the stage from every direction. Security tried to hold them back. But this wasn't a normal crowd. These weren't just fans. These were believers. People who saw John as more than a musician. He was their voice, their hope, their proof that one person could make a difference. A young medical student named Marcus Williams pushed through the crowd. "I'm a med student. Let me through." He reached John and immediately checked for a pulse. It was there, weak, but there. "He's breathing," Marcus shouted. "Someone call an ambulance." But here's where the story takes an incredible turn. While Marcus was checking John's vitals, something extraordinary began happening in the crowd. Instead of panicking, instead of stampeding, 20,000 people began to organize themselves. A woman named Patricia Gonzalez, a nurse from the Bronx, climbed onto the stage. "I'm a nurse," she announced. "We need to keep him stable until the ambulance arrives." Another voice from the crowd. "I'm a doctor, coming through." Dr. Samuel Rothstein, a cardiologist who'd come to the protest on his lunch break, made his way to the stage. Within minutes, John Lennon had a full medical team surrounding him. All volunteers, all strangers, all united by one purpose: keeping him alive. Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, leave that powerful like that helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. But while the medical team worked on John, something even more remarkable was happening in Washington Square Park. The crowd wasn't leaving. They weren't running. They were staying, waiting, hoping, praying. Someone started singing, softly at first. "All we are saying is give peace a chance." Then another voice joined in. Then another. Within seconds, 20,000 people were singing, not shouting, not screaming, singing. The sound was haunting, beautiful, a massive prayer rising into the cold December sky. Dr. Rothstein looked up from where he was monitoring John's heartbeat. Tears were streaming down his face. "In 30 years of medicine," he later said, "I'd never seen anything like it. It was like the entire crowd was willing him to live." The ambulance arrived 12 minutes after John collapsed. Paramedics rushed to the stage with a stretcher. But before they could take him, something happened that nobody expected. John's eyes opened. He looked confused at first, disoriented. Then he heard the singing. 20,000 voices, all for him. "What happened?" he whispered. Yoko grabbed his hand. "You collapsed, John, but you're okay. You're going to be okay." John tried to sit up, but Dr. Rothstein gently pushed him back down. "Easy, Mr. Lennon. You need to get to a hospital." "No," John said, his voice weak but determined. I need to talk to them." "John, you can't," Yoko started. "Please," John interrupted. Just hand me the microphone." Against every medical recommendation, someone handed John the microphone. He was still lying on the stage floor, paramedics surrounding him, but his voice carried through the park. I'm sorry," he began. The singing stopped. 20,000 people held their breath. "I'm sorry I scared you all." A wave of relieved laughter rippled through the crowd. "But I need you to know something. What just happened here, what you all just did, that's the revolution." His voice was getting stronger. "They want us to believe we're alone, that we can't trust each other, that when things get hard, we should just look out for ourselves. But look what happened here today. I fell down, and instead of running away, you ran toward me. Doctors came out of the crowd, nurses, medical students, complete strangers risked themselves to help me. And the rest of you? You stayed. You sang. You turned this park into a cathedral." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. "That's what love looks like. That's what community looks like. That's what we're fighting for. Not just peace in Vietnam, not just an end to the war, but this moment right here." When 20,000 strangers become family, the paramedics were getting insistent. They needed to get John to the hospital. But he had one more thing to say. "I'm going to be okay," he said, "because of you, all of you. Remember this feeling. Remember what we did here today, and carry it with you." As they loaded John onto the stretcher, the crowd began applauding. Not the wild, frenzied applause of a rock concert, but something deeper, more reverent. The sound of 20,000 people acknowledging something sacred. The ambulance doors closed, the sirens wailed, and John Lennon was rushed to St. Vincent's Hospital. But the crowd didn't leave. They stayed in Washington Square Park for hours, singing, talking, sharing stories, strangers becoming friends. What they didn't know was that their vigil was being watched, not just by the media, but by people in power who were very, very nervous about what they'd just witnessed. At St. Vincent's Hospital, doctors ran every test imaginable. What they found shocked everyone. John hadn't had a heart attack. He hadn't had a stroke. He was suffering from severe exhaustion and malnutrition. Mr. Lennon, Dr. Elizabeth Chen told him bluntly, "When was the last time you ate a full meal?" John looked at Yoko. Neither of them could remember. "You've been running on adrenaline and coffee for months," Dr. Chen continued. "Your body simply gave out. If you don't rest, if you don't start taking care of yourself, next time you might not be so lucky." But John wasn't thinking about rest. He was thinking about what had happened in the park. "Did you see them?" he kept asking Yoko. "Did you see what they did?" Yoko nodded, tears in her eyes. The whole world saw John. Because here's what John didn't know yet. The entire incident had been captured on film. News cameras, personal cameras. Someone in the crowd even had one of those new portable video recorders. By that evening, footage of John's collapse was on every news channel in America. But more importantly, footage of what the crowd did afterward was spreading like wildfire. The singing, the unity, the medical volunteers rushing to help. 20,000 people standing vigil. It was everything the establishment feared. People coming together. Strangers helping strangers. A community that couldn't be divided or controlled. That night, while John was sleeping in his hospital room, something was happening in Washington, D.C. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover was watching the footage, over and over again. "This is exactly what we were afraid of," he told his deputy. "Lennon isn't just a musician, he's organizing a movement, and now he's a martyr." Hoover made a decision that night, one that would haunt John for the rest of his time in America. "Increase surveillance," Hoover ordered. "I want to know everywhere he goes, everyone he talks to, everything he does, and find a way to discredit him. If we can't deport him, we'll destroy his reputation." But Hoover didn't understand something crucial. He didn't understand that the movement John had sparked wasn't about John anymore. It was about what those 20,000 people had felt in Washington Square Park. And feelings like that can't be surveilled. They can't be controlled. They can't be destroyed. While Hoover was plotting in Washington, something beautiful was happening across America. People who'd watched the footage were organizing their own peace vigils, not just for John, but for each other, to prove that what happened in Washington Square Park wasn't a fluke. It was a choice. In Boston, 5,000 people gathered on the Common. In Chicago, thousands filled Grant Park. In San Francisco, a candlelight vigil stretched along the entire Golden Gate Bridge, all of them singing the same song. "All we are saying is give peace a chance." The movement John had started was becoming something bigger than him, something unstoppable. John stayed in the hospital for 3 days. Doctor's orders. He needed rest, proper nutrition, time to heal. But on the 3rd day, something happened that would change everything. A young nurse named Claire Thompson came into his room. She was shaking, crying. "Mr. Lennon," she whispered, looking over her shoulder. "I need to tell you something." "What's wrong?" John asked, immediately concerned. "There are men in the hospital," Claire said. "They've been here since you arrived. They're not doctors. They're not visitors. They're watching you." John felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" Claire pulled out a piece of paper from her pocket. "I overheard them talking. They're FBI. They're recording your conversations, monitoring your visitors. And..." She hesitated. "And what?" John pressed. "They're trying to find something to use against you. Anything. A mistake. A wrong word. Something they can twist." John looked at Yoko. She'd gone pale. "Why are you telling me this?" John asked Claire. The young nurse's eyes filled with tears. "Because I was in Washington Square Park that day. I was in the crowd. I saw what you did, what we all did together. And I can't stay silent while they try to destroy you for teaching us to love each other." This was the moment John realized just how serious things had become. The government wasn't just watching him, they were hunting him. That night, John couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Claire's warning, about Hoover, about the deportation case that was still hanging over his head. "Maybe I should stop," he told Yoko in the darkness. "Maybe I should just focus on music, stay out of politics, keep my head down." Yoko was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that would define the rest of John's life in America. Those 20,000 people in the park didn't come to see a musician. They came to see someone who gave them hope, Someone who showed them they weren't alone. If you stop now, you're telling them they were wrong to believe. John stared at the ceiling. She was right. Of course she was right. But there was something else bothering him. Something he couldn't quite name. "What if I'm not strong enough?" he whispered. "I collapsed, Yoko. In front of everyone. What if I can't handle this?" Yoko took his hand in the darkness. "You didn't collapse because you were weak, John. You collapsed because you were carrying too much alone. But you're not alone anymore. You saw what happened in that park. You have 20,000 people ready to carry this with you." The next morning, John made a decision. He would hold a press conference. Right there in the hospital. He would tell the truth about everything. The exhaustion, the surveillance, the deportation case, everything. His managers were horrified. "John, you can't talk about the FBI investigation," they pleaded. "You'll make things worse." But John was done being silent. The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m., the same time he'd been supposed to speak in Washington Square Park. John insisted on that timing. It felt important, symbolic. Reporters packed into the hospital's conference room, cameras everywhere, microphones covering the table. When John walked in, he looked different, thinner, tired, but his eyes were clear, determined. What he said in the next 30 minutes would become one of the most famous speeches of his life. John sat down at the table, Yoko beside him. The room went silent. "Thank you all for coming," John began. His voice was steady, calm. "I want to talk to you about what happened in Washington Square Park, but I also want to talk about why it happened." He took a deep breath. "For the past year, I've been fighting to stay in this country. The government wants me gone. They say I'm a threat, that my music is dangerous, that my ideas will corrupt America's youth." A few reporters chuckled, but John wasn't smiling. And you know what? They're right. The room erupted, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing. John held up his hand. "Let me finish. They're right that I'm dangerous, not because I'm violent, not because I'm promoting drugs or crime or anything like that. I'm dangerous because I'm showing people that they don't have to accept the world as it is. I'm dangerous because when I collapsed in that park, 20,000 strangers didn't run away. They came together. They helped each other. They prove that we don't need governments or corporations or anyone else to tell us how to care for one another. That terrifies them." John leaned forward, his voice dropping. "I've learned something in the past few days. Something I should have known all along. This movement isn't about me. It never was. I'm just one person, one voice, and I'm not even that strong of a voice, apparently." He gestured to himself, still in his hospital gown. "I collapsed. I broke down. I failed. But you know what happened when I failed? The movement didn't fail. It got stronger. Because it was never about me. It was about all of us." John pulled out a piece of paper from his pocket. "Claire Thompson's warning. I've been told that the FBI is monitoring me, recording my conversations, looking for anything they can use to discredit me or deport me." The room exploded again, but John kept talking. And honestly, let them. Let them waste their time and resources watching one person. Because while they're focused on me, ... millions of people are out there living the revolution, being kind to strangers, helping their neighbors, refusing to accept violence as normal, building the world we all deserve. That's the real threat to systems of power. Not me, not my music, but ordinary people choosing love over fear, community over isolation, peace over war. John stood up, even though his doctors had told him to rest. "So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep making music. I'm going to keep speaking out. I'm going to keep showing up. And when I can't show up because I'm too exhausted or too scared or too human, I'm going to trust that you will show up for each other, just like you did in Washington Square Park, because that's what this is really about. Not one person changing the world, but all of us together, refusing to accept a world that doesn't work for everyone." John looked directly into the cameras. To everyone watching this, especially those in power who are afraid of what we're building, you can deport me, you can silence me, you can destroy my career, but you can't stop 20,000 people from singing together. You can't stop strangers from helping strangers. You can't stop the world from changing. Because we've already seen what we're capable of, and we're never going back. The press conference ended, but John's words echoed far beyond that hospital room. Within hours, the transcript was being printed and distributed at peace rallies across the country. Within days, it was being translated into dozens of languages. Within weeks, it had become a manifesto for a generation. But the most incredible part? The FBI's surveillance actually helped spread the message. Because every time they leaked information trying to discredit John, they just reminded people why they'd fallen in love with him in the first place. He was human, flawed, imperfect, just like all of us. And he was showing us that being imperfect doesn't mean we can't change the world. It means we need each other to do it. John was released from the hospital on December 15, 1971, just 5 days after his collapse. But in those 5 days, everything had changed. The deportation case was still pending. The FBI surveillance continued. The government was still trying to silence him, but they'd already lost. Because the movement that began in Washington Square Park was now unstoppable. People across America were organizing their own peace gatherings, not waiting for celebrities or leaders, just ordinary people coming together, singing, supporting each other, building the world they wanted to see. Marcus Williams, the medical student who'd first reached John, graduated and became a doctor. He specialized in community medicine, free clinics in poor neighborhoods, healthcare for people who couldn't afford it. I learned that day in the park, he said years later, that medicine isn't about treating diseases. It's about caring for people. John taught me that. Patricia Gonzalez, the nurse from the Bronx, started a program training ordinary citizens in emergency first aid. Because you never know when someone might need you, she explained, and we should all be ready to help. Dr. Samuel Rothstein, the cardiologist, began volunteering at music festivals and protests. Someone needs to look out for people who are looking out for the world, he said with a smile. Claire Thompson, the nurse who warned John about the FBI, quit her hospital job. She became an activist, fighting for patients' rights, privacy rights, the right to dissent without being destroyed. John showed me that silence is complicity, she said. I could have kept quiet, kept my job, stayed safe. But what's safety worth if we're not free? And John, he continued making music, fighting for peace, speaking truth to power. Yes, the government eventually succeeded in making his life difficult. The deportation battle dragged on for years. The surveillance never really stopped. But John had learned something crucial that day in Washington Square Park. The movement was never about him. It was always about us. Years later, after John had finally won his fight to stay in America, after the war in Vietnam had ended, after so much had changed, a reporter asked him about that day in Washington Square Park. "What do you remember most?" the reporter asked. John smiled. That sad, wise smile he developed over the years. "The singing," he said without hesitation. "I remember waking up and hearing 20,000 people singing. Not for me, but for each other. That's when I knew we'd won." "Won what?" the reporter asked. "Everything," John said simply. "We proved that love is stronger than fear, that community is stronger than power, that ordinary people, when they come together, can change the world." The reporter pressed further. "But didn't you lose? The deportation case took years. The FBI harassment never really stopped. Your music was banned in some places?" John shook his head. "You're not listening," he said gently. "I didn't change the world. We did. Those 20,000 people in the park, the doctors and nurses who volunteered, the millions who watched and decided to live differently, I just collapsed. They're the ones who did something incredible. Today, over 50 years later, Washington Square Park has a small plaque. Most people walk right past it, but it reads, "On December 10th, 1971, 20,000 people proved that love is stronger than power. They sang, they helped, they stayed. In memory of the moment we chose each other." The legacy of that day isn't about John Lennon. It's about what happens when ordinary people refuse to be divided, when strangers choose to care for each other, when a community decides that their humanity is more important than anyone's authority. John collapsed in Washington Square Park. But 20,000 people held him up, and in doing so, they held each other up. They held us all up. That's the revolution. Not violence, not destruction, but the simple, radical act of loving each other when the world tells us to be afraid. And that revolution continues today. Every time someone helps a stranger, every time a community comes together, every time we choose love over fear, we're continuing what began that cold December day, when one man fell down, and 20,000 people showed us what it means to rise up together. If this story of unity and compassion moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that we're stronger together. Have you ever witnessed a moment when a community came together to help someone in need? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more untold stories about the moments that changed music history forever.